Hey guys, in this video I want to discuss the readings from chapter 4. One is the look at millennials in media, selling digital millennials, the social construction and technological bias of a consumer generation, and also the trailer for The Great Indoors. I wanted to discuss a couple things that I noticed. One thing that I've noticed reading about millennials, and I've read a lot of articles about millennials, both for this class and just outside of class. I like reading about generational differences and so forth. Is that millennials approach consumerism as kind of a neutral thing. Some of the older generations, I think the hippies are a great example, saw consumerism as a bad thing, and one of the themes of Generation X, the generation before, is that in their youth, a lot of them also rejected materialism. The 90s generation, the generation that was teenagers, young adults in the 1990s, that generation was stereotypically cynical about everything. They disliked corporate brands, corporate identity. They very much wanted to create their own authentic identity. I thought it was very interesting that this article portrays what's going on with teens as a bad thing. He raises concerns, the author, about the rising personal debt. And while there is concern for that, a lot of that personal debt is coming from, let's say, student loan debt. It's not necessarily coming from buying a new car or having new clothes. And, while the youth generation spends more money on that, there's also reason to think that the younger generations are not buying into the American dream as we always understood it. I read an article recently. I've actually read several articles, and I wish I had them to cite, but I don't. About the declining number of young people who have cars. Less people are owning cars, less people are having driver's license. More people are using apps like Uber and Lyft to get around, as young people prefer now to live in urban areas with access to public transportation and live within walking distance of places. There's a little bit less demand for cars like there used to be. I've read articles about how we are living in a new society of collective ownership. So I think some of the conclusions that the author came to in that article were not true. The fact is, it's not so much about personal consumption anymore. It's more about the experiences you can have. And young people tend to consume to have experiences rather than to own things. The same is true as well for home ownership, which, we could easily say, well, it's because of, a less than ideal job market, or maybe it's because a lot of students now have student loan debt and they're not able to buy homes. But there does seem to be a shift in thinking about owning things. Looking at the trailer for the video, I thought it was kind of amusing. It was very stereotypical in its view of young people. I thought it was interesting that the young people were seen as very coddled. They were easily offended. They were very quick to tell Joel McHale's character, you can't say this, you can't say that. So I think it really went to the heart of a lot of stereotypes that we have about young people. Despite all of the trends that we see with millennials, and despite the stereotypes that we hold, which may or may not be true, the question that I have for you guys is, do the perceived or real behaviors of millennials, do you think in the future that they are going to go with the millennials? That it's just going to be kind of a generational thing. Some of the things that were outlined in the article, like the idea of like participatory culture, and the idea of the consumer being the one who advertises the product. and also the idea of just being glued to computers in general. Do you think that as time progresses, these ideas will be diffused throughout society so that it's not necessarily distinctive of one generation? The example that I can think of where I would say yes, that might happen would be the hippies of the 1960s. They were obviously countercultural. In the 1970s, however, hippie culture kind of died out, but it did leave a legacy in American culture. A lot of people in the 1970s were a lot more liberal in terms of sexuality. There were a lot more open marriages. People were becoming more accepting of couples cohabitating before marriage, whereas before the sexual revolution, before the hippie movement, that wasn't the case. A lot of states, a lot of cities started to relax their laws against marijuana as more people began trying marijuana, more like mainstream conventional type of people. So while the hippie movement died, there was a lot of diffusion that happened throughout society. So my question for you guys is, do you think that's going to be the case of millennials, that the distinctive traits that they have, that is going to be diffused throughout society, or do you think that that's something that's is going to be just distinctive to the millennials? So I look forward to hearing you guys' responses.